So welcome everybody. My name is Kevin. I was a BHSC student just until last year. I graduated with my 4-year degree from the Bachelor of Health Science Honors Program. Obviously, my first, second, and third year were hit with COVID. But, most first year and fourth year, I was at Mac. And before we start, I wanted to say a big thank you to BHSS and Danny for helping coordinate this entire session. So Danny from now fourth year, helping coordinate everything. Big shout out to Danny and the team. So today's focus is on your interview day and the preparation for your interview. And this is the outline because some of y'all may have attended our previous webinars. Now, we have Casper, whatever webinars on different parts of the cycle. If you want access to those, just email us. We'll send it over. But I mean, we've had interview webinars for different schools, but we have exclusive content today just for BHSS on the privatization of healthcare in Ontario, rapid fire tips for health policy and ethics questions, 12 additional ones, and some exclusive pro tips at the end as well. So a little bit about me. I'm a first year medical student at the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic is the #1 hospital on the face of the planet. It's a top 10 US medical school. And the first year I applied, in true BHSC fashion. I applied trying to get into medical school after my third year, but I didn't get in. I got interviews at McMaster in Ottawa, but I got waitlisted and I didn't get in. The next year I applied to both Canadian and US medical schools. I applied to like 30 in total, and I got into both Canadian and medical schools. For example, I got into McMaster, and the big choice was, am I going to stay in Canada, McMaster, or will I go to the Mayo Clinic? And you see how it turned out. So if you have any questions about that, applying international, anything, ask me at the end. So the focus of this presentation is the difference between great and extraordinary answers, and I'll tell you what that means. But this is how I interpret things, and it's what helped me succeed. So you have an interview coming up, or you're going to have one. A lot of second years in the chat. There are hot topics that you must be aware of: the opioid epidemic, homelessness, barriers to care, medical assistance in dying, right? And not only do you have to understand these topics, not only do you have to know the facts, right? Well, this in 2021 this happened, or whatever, but you have to be able to understand the facts and be able to provide an expert opinion on those facts. It's not just a multiple choice test where you're going to be like, okay, bubble in the right answer, but you have to look someone in the eyes and be able to convince them, give them a compelling argument for 3, 4, 5 minutes on these subjects. So definitely spend a lot of time with this list. By the way, the slides will be sent to you right after this presentation ends. So don't worry about taking notes right now or screenshotting or anything. It'll all be sent to you. Just sit back and relax. Plus, it's being recorded, and the recording will be sent to you. But here's the thing. I interviewed twice for medical schools in Canada in 2 cycles. The first time I didn't get in. The second time I got in. What went wrong the first time? Well, the first time I'd look at all these cool topics that are healthcare related, and I would be able to provide expert opinions on them, compelling arguments. What I was missing, though, and what I started doing the next time that I applied, is thinking outside the box. For example, these are great topics to know, but a lot of times in medical school interviews, you're going to be asked about weird things like the wealth gap, like cancel culture, like climate change, right? So you can imagine my first cycle interviewing, I was asked the question about cancel culture. I've been asked that in so many interviews, US and Canada. I can't even tell you why. And I'm like, man, I just got asked the question on cancel culture, but I've been studying like organ donation for like the past 3 months, right? So the second cycle, I started thinking outside the box. What are things that affect people and society as a whole? Because if they do that, then it actually becomes a matter of public health. And public health is a huge theme when it comes to medical school interviews, okay? So these are great lists, and they will be sent to you. I would spend a lot of time understanding these topics. And this is, coming straight out of an interview my friend had. Is war good or bad, right? You can be asked literally anything. Since as a future physician, you're expected to have well thought out opinions on the world because, patients don't live in isolation. Patients live in the society around them, so you should understand a thing or two about it. So I always believe the best way to learn is through practice. So we're going to do this question together. And again, for those who just joined, we're going to have a lot of new content not in previous webinars if you've seen this before. So let's look. Imagine you're a physician and you encounter a patient with chronic pain who requests opioid medication. How would you balance the need for effective pain management with the risk of opioid addiction? All right, I'll let y'all think about that. What would your answer be? And now let's go over an answer to this question, okay? I would conduct a comprehensive assessment of the patient's pain. When did it start? Does it radiate? Et cetera, et cetera. I would have open conversations with the patient about their pain experience and treatment history. If opioids are necessary, I would proceed with caution, starting at the lowest dose to avoid dependence. I would revise the treatment plan with the patient periodically, which means I'd regularly review it and adjust as needed. And lastly, you'd give a conclusion. So I want someone in the chat or someone to unmute and tell me, is this a good answer or not? And I promise you, I will not go to the next slide until one person does this. So I am waiting. Who thinks this is a good answer or a bad answer? Just put it in the chat. I do think this is a good answer, but everyone is just like, no, it's a bad answer. But I think you're right. This is a great answer. I mean, it's a very mature answer. It hits all the points of the question, right? And it's like, it's something a clinician would say even. So I'm with you. I'm with you, Mohammed. Thank you for confirming I'm not crazy. But here's the thing. My first year interviewing, I would give answers like this. And, I'd be like, man, I crushed that interview. Why didn't I get in? Nothing tripped me up about my interview at McMaster or Ottawa. So let's look at this. Let's look at this bottom section, the extraordinary answer. What if, in addition to this, we said, I could first explore a multidisciplinary approach to treating pain, for example, physiotherapy, lifestyle modifications, exercise, diet. What if we also said, I would educate the patient about the risks of opioid use and how we can minimize these risks to build a trusting doctor-patient relationship? And then what if we went even farther? What if we made connections to the opioid crisis? There's an opioid crisis in every major metropolitan center in Canada, especially in the Northern Territory as well, so not even the metropolitan centers. What if we made a connection to sickle cell disease and racism? For instance, when a lot of Black young individuals come to the emergency room in pain, they need treatment for their pain, the physicians might be, well, this person's just looking for opioids. But the thing is, sickle cell disease is a trait that is very prevalent in Black populations, especially due to the protection it confers against malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, I think that's what it's called. Anyways, because of that, it goes underdiagnosed, and people will come in immense pain because of their sickle cell disease, and they will not receive the treatment because of stereotypes and prejudice. You could discuss specific medical cases relevant to Canada or Ontario. You could briefly talk about the science of opioid addiction. You could briefly mention your knowledge of things like naloxone training. Maybe you've been doing things like street medicine, where you've been volunteering and helping the homeless. Maybe you have administered naloxone, right? For example, opioid addiction, you could talk about receptors. Maybe you took everyone here, I can say this with confidence, everyone here took classes on cell biology. So you know a thing or two about like cocaine and reuptake. So I wouldn't spend too much time on that. But these are all amazing ways that you can go beyond and provide an extraordinary answer. And this is what I started doing the second year that I interviewed. The second year I interviewed, I started going from this, the great answers, to the extraordinary answers, making connections that other people did not. And I'll tell you why it matters, okay? By the way, all of these questions are coming from thebrightdoctor.com, which is our website. And this one's particularly coming from the opioid crisis question bank. And all the answers that we provide and ideas to go beyond and avoid are there. For example, we could have also talked about prescription drug monitoring programs, because Ontario, for example, monitors which physicians are prescribing drugs and how much, because you don't want to be overprescribing opiates, for example. So a lot of goodies there. Now, why do we need to provide extraordinary answers? Why is it not enough to simply give a great answer? I'll tell you. Say our McMaster, 600 people are being interviewed. 200 is the class size, 200 something. True, if you consider the waitlist movement and whatever, around half of the people are getting in, but it's not like that at every medical school. Some medical schools, only 30% of people get an offer. right? So when everybody, I know how hard all of you have worked to be in your positions. You have stellar GPA, MCAT, probably car score, right? I didn't even do that good on my cars, but probably a great Casper. You know, you spent time studying for the Casper. So everyone here is a phenomenal applicant, and the fact that you're interviewing means that you belong there. You deserve that seat. So it really becomes, how do you start standing out among this really competitive pool of interviewees? The people out of like the 8,000 or 6,000 who applied, who got chosen to interview, how do you stand out? And that is why you need to go from the great answer to the extraordinary answer. And that's what made the difference for me in my second cycle. And the way I see it is like this. A lot of people are pushing these blocks, okay? And this is the finish line, the successful interview. And the first year, this would be me, right? This person would be me. I'd be pushing that block. Now the second year, I'm like, well, how can I do something different? How can I be different? And it really came down to, look at these people. They look back, they think you're behind, but then you look ahead, you think they're ahead. This path on top was what I did my first year. Listen to White Coat Black Heart, read Doing Right. Let's listen to the CMAG podcast, right? Let's go on healthydebate.ca and read everything I can. Let's go on CVC Health and read everything I can. I was doing, and virtually everyone was doing the exact same thing. So when you reach that level, it really becomes who can communicate the best. Because you're not saying anything that's novel. Everyone has the same ideas. Everyone's been doing the same extracurriculars, and it becomes very, very hard to stand out. Sometimes it's enough to get you through it, especially if you're a great communicator, but I wasn't willing to take those chances the second time that I interviewed. All right? And I'll tell you near the end of the presentation what I did that was fully different, went against the grain, and helped me stand out in my answers. But now let's talk about this. The second time I interviewed, I really came down to how can I stand out? And it came down to 5 things. To stand out in your answers, it's either you're addressing more perspectives than others, right? You're demonstrating your knowledge. You're offering more alternative solutions than other people, creative solutions, or even how to avoid something in the future. You're a better speaker, so I went over this. You're more personable. You give a better, more organized answer. You look at the camera and you speak with confidence. That's a big one. You make connections, maybe to your personal life, to your future career, where you don't demonstrate domain-specific knowledge. So for the opioid question, domain-specific knowledge could have been like about how opiates work, or about the policies currently in Ontario. To your personal life could have been if you did, training in the Naloxone administration, or you did some research in opioid addiction. So these are how to make connections. And lastly, explain why. A lot of people in their interviews, in their MMIs, they'll give the coolest answers. Oh, I'd make an app. We should make an app. We should make a website. We should do this. Use the blockchain. Like any buzzword you can think of, they're saying it, but they don't explain why. Well, why would that be the best approach? And that will cost them points in that MMI. And I'm showing this guy, the smart aleck. Everyone knows a smart aleck, okay? Guy or gal, everyone knows a smart aleck. This is the person in your class. And, I'm going to be honest, in BHSC, you'll find these people as well who talk condescendingly to people. They think they know everything. And they will look at you in your eyes and speak with utter confidence. All right? They will look in your eyes and say, yes, a giraffe's neck is on average 20 feet. And you'll believe them because you have no reason not to. But for example, I just made that up. I have no clue how long a giraffe's neck is. But these people, I believe it or not, make it pretty far. They make it pretty damn far just because of the fact that they can look at a camera and speak with confidence. Whereas a lot of amazing individuals with beautiful thoughts will stumble, will not be confident, will be like looking around, thinking, move their hands too much. Don't be a smart aleck, but learn from the smart aleck in terms of communication. Now, should you speak for the full time in your interviews? When it comes to synchronous interviews, which is someone's across you, in most cases, the answer is no, because you want to give time for follow-up questions. For example, McMaster's is 8 minutes. If you speak for 8 minutes, you will bore the hell out of them. Plus, what I found personally, like my personal experience, is if you talk for like 3 minutes or 4, and most of my answers were around 3 to 4 minutes, if you miss something, They want to help you. They'll ask you about it. Okay, well, cool. That was a very, well thought out opinion, but what about this? And they will let you get the points that you missed. You can't do that if you talk for 8 minutes straight. That's just my experience. They will try to help you. However, when it's asynchronous, it's best to try. Yeah, obviously, if it's on pure talent like Queens or the U of T ones, then yeah, what are you gonna do? Just stare at yourself for another minute? It's like Casper. It screen records you, and you have no choice. There's no one on the other end. Now, should you go in depth or broad with your answers? And for me, I like to explain 1 or 2 ideas really deeply, because I know people are like, oh, I want to address a lot of perspectives, right? Well, I would do 1 or 2 ideas deeply so I get sufficient depth and show my thinking, my values. And then either towards the end or at the beginning, I would mention, the other perspectives maybe I didn't explain too much. I'd acknowledge them. So that is generally how I do it. And feel free to ask me about that at the end. All right. So let's go to the next part. I told you I'd be moving quick. How does the Ontario health system address the needs of Indigenous populations, and what improvements can be made? I'll let y'all think about how you would answer this question. All right. Let's look. Let's start here at the introduction sentence. Okay, so skip main idea. The Ontario health system has made efforts to address the unique healthcare needs of Indigenous populations, though there are still significant areas for improvement. This is an introductory sentence that is very subtly telling you how your answer is going to be organized. It's phenomenal. It tells you first you're going to talk about the efforts it's made, and then you're going to talk about the areas for improvement. One way the system addresses these needs is through culturally sensitive care. This involves providing healthcare services that respect and incorporate Indigenous cultural practices, beliefs, and values. For example, some healthcare facilities in Ontario have integrated traditional healing practices alongside conventional medical treatments, recognizing the importance of holistic care that encompasses physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Amazing first, body paragraph of the answer, because we talk about, Ontario has integrated traditional healing practices. This shows that you understand what Ontario offers. This, and in an indirect way, right? Because a lot of people like to force their activities into their answers. In a very indirect way, you show that, hey, I've been around. I've been either volunteering at hospitals, or I've been part of community initiatives, or, at the very minimum, I've done my good research on this topic, that I understand that Ontario has these combined approaches. The Ontario government has also made efforts to improve access to healthcare for Indigenous communities. This includes funding for programs and services specifically designed for Indigenous populations, such as the Aboriginal Health Access Centers, which offer a range of health and wellness services. Beautiful. Now, a second time, you're showing that you understand there are Aboriginal Health Access Centers that provide certain services and funding. However, there are still notable gaps and challenges. Beautiful. We're in line with our introductory sentence, because we say there are still significant areas for improvement. So now we're going there. One major issue is the accessibility of services, especially for those in remote or rural Indigenous communities. These areas often lack adequate healthcare facilities and professionals, leading to significant disparities in health outcomes. Another area for improvement is the training and education of healthcare professionals in Indigenous health. While some progress has been made, there's a need for more comprehensive and mandatory training on cultural competence and historical and social factors that impact the health of Indigenous peoples. So now we've highlighted 2 things Ontario is doing, 2 things to improve. And let's look what's coming next. Furthermore, there's a need for greater involvement of Indigenous communities in the planning and delivery of healthcare services. This is where this answer starts going beyond. It becomes an extraordinary answer, because if you think of it, the first two body paragraphs of this answer address the first part of the question, and the second 2 address the improvements. Now we're going to tell you how those improvements can be made. This could be achieved through more meaningful partnerships and collaboration with Indigenous leaders and organizations, ensuring that healthcare initiatives are community-driven and responsive to their specific needs. Amazing. We just said, here's what Ontario is doing. Here are the areas where it's lacking. To fix this, we should get Indigenous community leaders in the decision-making rooms, because we don't want to make laws for people that govern the healthcare of people without them engaging in shared decision making. By the way, shared decision making, that should ring a bell. That's a CanMed's role. So we provide a very mature and amazing solution to these problems. And if you noticed, we are integrating CanMeds into our answer. And this is what happens when you start preparing a lot. You integrate the CanMeds roles into your answers. We just showed that we are people. I'm someone who values shared decision making simply by saying that this idea. I didn't have to force it in my answer. I didn't have to cognitively think about it. But once you start preparing for all these different topics and the solutions to them, like, that topic list I gave you at the beginning, you're going to start being able to provide answers like this that are going to really help you stand out. And again, yeah, you demonstrate relevant knowledge of Ontario policies up here. You have multifaceted ways of addressing the topic. And then lastly, you have innovative ideas. Okay. And again, to go beyond, you could advocate for increased investment in healthcare infrastructure in remote Indigenous communities, right? There's a lot of cool go beyond ideas you can check out once we send you these slides. Avoid, for example, don't overlook the historical context of Indigenous health disparities, including the impact of colonization and residential schools. Boom. So our resource provides you go beyond and avoid for everything. Just from this, you could have also went beyond by mentioning colonization, forced sterilization, residential schools, all of these things that cause either suffering, trauma in the Indigenous populations and affect their social determinants of health. And they may even cause mistrust in medicine, right? If the medical community did force sterilizations on you 100 years ago, are you going to trust them now, right? So there's all these factors, and this is how you can start going beyond by not only answering the question, but showing you're, going beyond in one of the 5 ways that I've shown. All right, are there any questions before we get to the next section? We're halfway done, by the way. We're halfway done this presentation. Let's talk about privatization of healthcare. I'm going to breeze through this. This is another BHSS exclusive, never before seen in our webinars. So what is your opinion on the privatization of healthcare in Canada? This is a huge hot topic because the Ford government is pushing to have more things done in the same way that like family medicine is, right? Your family doctor, a lot of times they have a private clinic, and there's a shift to going towards that route or even beyond that route, kind of like the American system. And what's your opinion? So let's quickly breeze through this. Due to the health, and I'm actually going to just go to the main points. So you give your introduction up here, and you can skim it while I'm talking. You talk about the long backlogs of elective surgeries, that are necessary. For example, hip replacements. Is a hip replacement necessary for you to be alive tomorrow? No. Is it necessary for you to enjoy your life, your one life on this earth? Yes, right? Or cataract surgeries. You can't see. Yeah, you're alive, but you can't see properly. You can't drive, right? So it really is debilitating. And if you're going to wait for years, then that's really terrible. And then it just says, Ontario government has been pushing for expansion of private clinics, exactly for cataract and hip replacement surgeries. So you can see this in the introduction we give, I understand what's going on. That's basically the idea that comes across. On one hand, privatization of healthcare in Canada could bring benefits such as increased competition due to the profit motive, which can improve quality of care and reduce costs. So this is true. For instance, here in the US at the Mayo Clinic, #1 hospital in the world, the US is a private healthcare system. The Mayo Clinic has things for cancer therapy like proton beam therapy. They're making carbon therapy. These are like the cutting edge of cancer therapy, cancer radiation therapy. These things don't even exist in Canada, but there's like a dozen of them in the US, right? So if you want the top, like the cream of the crop, sometimes you don't get that in Canada. And they could also bring in more overall resources, like more operating rooms, more MRI machines, because now people are like, okay, well, I can make a hospital for myself and start making money. Boom, boom, boom. However, there are also concerns with privatization of healthcare. One is like the unequal distribution of resources and access to care, right? Now, maybe the public system is going to become underfunded, or doctors are going to shift from the public system to the private system, right? Why I get paid more at this private hospital? Why would I work at North York General Hospital, or what is it, St. Joseph's, or Hamilton General? Additionally, the profit-driven nature of private companies may lead to prioritization of profits over patient care. So that's another huge one. Lastly, private clinics may take resources like nurses and physicians away from the public system. Yeah, so you can see how we discussed that. And lastly, there's a conclusion that talks about, privatization has already been done, like family medicine in their own private clinics, and how that can help alleviate things. And then it talks about putting in regulations so private clinics don't overcharge patients, and so on and so forth. Very mature answer. Go beyond. You can discuss how COVID-19 exacerbated problems in the healthcare system. You could discuss how private clinics can upsell patients, oh, you should get this test and this test and this test. You could have a health equity lens, understanding the drawbacks of privatization, especially for the most vulnerable members of society. Like, what's the impact of privatization on the most, vulnerable groups in our community? You can talk about news that you've read, or talk about other countries and their healthcare systems. Boom, huge. Everyone, even if this question is asked, I guarantee you people are going to be like, well, Ontario should do this and this. No one is going to, maybe 2% of people are going to be like, well, let's look at the US, what the US is doing. And even less people, maybe no one, maybe it was only me. It was probably only me last year doing this. But I'm like, okay, well, this is what the US is doing. And by the way, this is what the Bismarck system in Germany is doing. And this is what the NHS in England's doing. You can have these mixed models like we have in Singapore. Boom, 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 boom. The second you start going beyond what everyone is doing, like reading the same crap, okay? Crap, I'm going to say it. It's not crap. It's great resources, right? Healthydebate.ca. But you can't get ahead if you're going to say the same things everybody else is saying. So I hope that's very clear. I hope it's very, very clear. I think it is. But okay, before I get too worked up on that, are there any questions before our last section?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you'll get into this in the last section, but what are some strategies to go from great answers to extraordinary ones?
I'll tell you what I did, and this is going to be towards the end. Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I've already covered half of it, which is those 5 ways to go beyond. And as you prepare for these questions, right, you can go online, go on thebrightdoc.com. I mean, we have free questions, and finding answers to these topics, finding your opinion on these topics, and crafting your expert answer. This isn't something you're going to do on the spot. Most of the time, it's something that you've integrated into your thinking. Okay, first impressions, always rehearse the first few words. So whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, the first sentence I was going to say, I would just say it in the last 10, 20 seconds of thinking time, just so I could start off with a bang. Like, oh, this guy is like, you can't stop him, because first impressions matter. If it's a synchronous interview, I always smile, introduce myself, and say, with whom do I have the pleasure of speaking with? And they would tell me their name most often, sometimes not. And it sounded kind of corny to me. Oh, with whom do I have the pleasure of speaking with? But it was actually a very, very mature way, and I realized afterwards, of introducing myself. Lastly, personal questions. Have stories ready. You will be asked personal questions, whether it's a follow-up question in your MMI or whether you're doing a panel interview. I'm not going to bore you with the CanMed rules, okay? But I like this list. It comes from the American system, like communication, cultural competency, blah, blah, blah. Have 2 to 3 stories from your life that relate to these. Because you could be asked a question like, what's the biggest challenge that you've overcome? And this is going to hit a few pillars: overcoming conflict, resilience, capacity for improvement, problem solving even. And you need to have things ready to say, because if you're thinking on the spot, you're already behind, because while I'm spending my thinking time rehearsing how I'm going to, say the first sentence and so on, you can't spend that thinking time, like actually spend all of it thinking, because then you won't have an organized answer. And the way you answer these, this is pretty formulaic actually, because it's unique by the token that it's your life stories. It's automatically unique. You can't say the same answer as somebody else because it's your life. So the STAR method is what I use: situation, task, action, result. You describe the situation and your responsibility. For example, last semester in the McMaster Bio Society, while organizing a programming skills workshop for first-year students, we encountered an unexpected vendor cancellation, leaving us without crucial materials. I was tasked with swiftly finding a replacement vendor without overshooting our budget. Beautiful, right? The S&T, I said that first because it's something you want to get over with immediately. You don't want to stick around in the S&T. And by the way, this is obviously not the biggest challenge someone's overcome, but it is a challenge. It's just for an example. The S and the T, your example could be like, I was in the Prime Minister's office curing cancer. But believe me, that does not get you points because it's the A and the R that reflect your values, that reflect who you are, your problem-solving strategies, and those CanMed roles, for example. Okay? So the quicker you get to A and the R, the better, because the first time I interviewed and I didn't get in anywhere, I would spend like half the time talking about the situation because I thought it was the coolest situation. And obviously the matters are important to you and you want to kind of give an accurate idea of what was going on. The second time, I made my stories, I practiced making them as short as possible, just so I could get to the A and the R. Consequently, I quickly researched alternative suppliers, assessed their offerings against our needs, and strategically approached the most promising ones to renegotiate terms suitable for our budget. I used strategies like calling suppliers instead of email to ensure rapid communication. Ultimately, we secured the necessary materials under budget, and the workshop went on without a hitch, earning praise from attendees. Beautiful, beautiful, mature answer that hits the pillars. But here's the thing, and I really think I invented this, and if I didn't, you can let me know. The STAR method is missing another letter, the T. I think it should be called the STAR method because the T stands for takeaway. And where possible, you should always include a personal story or relation to your future profession in your answers, and it'll often make sense which one you use, okay? So let's see how a takeaway would have looked like here. We say the same answer, but then at the end, we add, as I pursue a career in medicine, I will continue to draw on such skills to stay collected in rapidly changing situations. Through strong communication skills, along with problem solving, I will continue to ensure team needs are met for the benefit of my future patients. This is absolutely beautiful because not only did you give them a great answer, but you gave them more. You showed that you've reflected on your future profession, what it requires, the skills that it requires. And I would have one of these takeaways, and sometimes you would see it leaves like a smile on their face when you say takeaway like this. I would have a takeaway for every CanMeds pillar. Again, I didn't use CanMeds, I used the American system, which I gave you on the previous slide. But like for collaboration, I'd always say something about, oh, in the future, I'm going to have to collaborate with multidisciplinary teams to provide team-based care, holistic care to my patients. And there's going to be, handoff of care, right? You can say those CanMed words that you want. And I would integrate these, and I would have a takeaway for every kind of, pillar that I could be asked. I'd have a takeaway for it. So in my answers, for any sort of answer, personal question or not, if at the end I have nothing else to say, I would say one of these takeaways. And it would be like it would be an amazing final impression, because imagine you give a great first impression, like I said, first line I said was always rehearsed. And then I'd say my great answer, and then I just to go beyond. And then finally, I'd hit them with a takeaway that I've rehearsed like 100 times, and they're just like, "Wow, that is a real medical student right there." So yeah, have stories ready for all these pillars that reflect your values, perhaps connected to your future career. As a future physician, as a medical student, I will do this, this, and that. Relate these to those CanMeds items. And here's something no one's doing. No one is doing this. Okay, connect it to the medical school if you can. Research the crap out of the medical schools you're applying to, because you never know. And this comes from the American system, because here in America, the top applicants apply to 30 schools, get interviews at 20 schools, and get into 10 schools. Okay, so I know I don't want to ruin your mood. I applied as an international, so I didn't have the luxury of doing that. But those medical schools want to know, like, why do you want to attend this medical school? They're kind of suspicious because you're such a top applicant. Well, why us? Okay. Canadian medical schools, obviously, you're lucky to get a single interview. You're lucky to get into a single medical school. So they don't really ask that. But although I have been asked, why do you want to go here, one time by a Canadian medical school. But imagine at McMaster, they ask you a question about antibiotic resistance. And then you give your phenomenal answer. And then you're like, I look forward to being a medical student at McMaster, because on the 3rd floor of MDCL, you have the antibiotic, like the premier antimicrobial resistance research laboratory in Canada. Boom. No one is researching their medical school and being like, oh, what global health opportunities does Queen's offer? What, where are the clinical rotation sites at Ottawa, right? People are not researching these. And if you do, it can be an amazing addition. Imagine an Indigenous health question, and then you figure out, okay, yeah, Ottawa, lets you go to these rural indigenous communities. And you say that in your answer. No one's doing this, maybe because no one's also interviewing with the US, but I did. So I'm like, damn, well, I can also research these Canadian schools. And there have been several times where I was able to provide facts about the medical school in my interview. All right. Rapid fire tips, another BHSS exclusive. By the way, other questions? I think I'm slowly answering Muhammad's question. Am I not, Muhammad?
Yes, you are.
Exactly. Let me get some more water in me.
Kevin, I kind of want to ask something if that's all right. So we talked a lot about like bringing in like a lot of our outside specific knowledge on various topics, whether it's the school that we're applying to or some healthcare topic. How do we get away from the notion of just like kind of knowledge dumping on them and showing that like, oh, we know everything, as opposed like to like providing like a really well thought out answer where bringing in our outside knowledge is appropriate? Like, how do we stay away from like just like throwing like knowledge that is not relevant in a situation?
Well, thank you for your question, Danny. This comes down to, should you discuss one or two things deeply or go everything broadly? So in a question on, for example, antimicrobial resistance, you would spend that time thinking deeply about, of course, the question and your answer to it. And the part about McMaster, that would be a takeaway. That would be like a last tidbit that I would add. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be any part of my main argument at all. It would be like a takeaway, an additional thing that helps me go above and beyond after I give a great, well thought out answer. Okay. So you're on mute, Danny, if you said anything.
Oh yeah, I was just thanks. There we go.
Yeah, so a lot of times these are a lot of the times if you have like specific news knowledge, I would start my answer with saying your understanding of the event, huge. So I'd start off by okay, this is how I'd start off with the introductory organizing sentence, and I'm gonna get to how you can do that. The organizing sentence I would always use, I would always introduce my answer with like my understanding of the topic, and then I'd get into my answer, and then I'd have like one or two takeaways. So if you structure it just like that, it's very coherent, and there's those three spots at the beginning to show your expert knowledge or of like current events, and then the takeaways at the end, where you can go beyond, and it doesn't detract from your main argument. Rapid fire tips. I mean, it's Christmas, guys and gals. This is all the cool things I think I knew about certain topics. Of course, there's many more topics in this, but organ donation. Talk about the opt-out versus opt-in model. Other countries like Iran, which have a marketplace for organs. Opt-out versus opt-in. Like some European countries are like, well, you're automatically an organ donor unless you opt out. Here in the West, or at least in North America, it's usually opt-in, so you're not an organ donor unless you choose to be one. Exploitation, living donors. Homelessness, talk about statistics, complex housing initiatives. For example, zoning in Toronto, zoning in Hamilton, how we can make new types of developments that can lend themselves to the homeless population. Rehabilitation, re-entry into workforce initiatives, social determinants of health. Medical assistance in dying, talk about the Canadian law. There were changes in 2021. Now it's been expanded to not just terminal illnesses. Talk about the slippery slope argument. If we keep expanding, MAID, well, can we run into problems? Religion, big. Healthcare costs and autonomy. Climate change, talk about the effects of medicine in relation to Indigenous health. For example, a lot of Indigenous communities identify with their environment. So if the climate were to ruin their environment, well, they would lose part of their identity, and that affects their health. Synthetic biology, I'm not even going to explain that. Look that one up. Huge. Clean tech, education and research. Clean tech is like, fintech, health tech. It's just clean earth tech. Look at how technology is being used. Vaccine ethics. Because then again, like with climate change, people are just like regurgitating what they read on the WHO's website. Please just say something cool for once. I beg you. Vaccine ethics. The COVID-19 response, obviously in Canada, truck protests, Emergency Act. There's a lot of news about that recently, whether it was warranted or not. efficacy, mistrust in medicine, the vaccine, vaccine science in general, and maybe you can talk about like polio vaccine, right? The original vaccine was for smallpox. It's called vaccinia. You could talk about a lot of things really to build your argument, right? Not as like you're giving them a history lesson. Indigenous health, colonization, rural health, cultural competency, sterilizations, residential schools, and trauma, and social determinants of health. Housing, I talk about the housing crisis, international investments, the vacancy tax, homelessness again, economy and immigration. International medical graduates, I talk about retraining, residency spots, unmatched rate for Canadian medical graduates, language, multiculturalism, standard of care. Doctor shortage, you can talk about international medical graduates. So here, look, there's so many connections, like IMGs, you see, they're connecting to one another, and housing talked about homelessness. This is the beauty of like really delving deep into these topics. Imagine I didn't study the doctor shortage, and now I'm asked the question on the doctor shortage. Because I know a lot about international medical graduates, you know, mid-level providers, maybe studied telehealth, so now you know something about tele-ICUs. You can give a very, very great answer without having specifically studied that, just because you're a person who understands society in a broad sense. Aging population, you can talk about the tax system. There's a lot of, you know, elderly people that can't work. Now, a smaller amount of young people need to pay taxes and fund healthcare and social services for them, right, because of our population structure. Ageism, telehealth, loneliness problems, wealth transfer, medical assisted dying, and so on. AI and healthcare, I mean, I'm your guy for that because I did internships on Microsoft and other companies in tech. So you can talk about bias. Everyone, AI and healthcare. Oh, let me just talk about bias. Yeah. You want to make sure your data is not biased. Cool. You can talk about natural language processing applied to electronic health records, data security. You can talk about cyber war. At the Mayo Clinic right now, every single day, there's dozens of attacks from all countries trying to get the health records from the system. So every hospital's under attack by other countries, state actors, private, you know, companies, militia groups. In fact, last year in Toronto, there was a hospital, or either a hospital system even, that was fully like crippled because they were under like some like ransomware attack. Genomes, quantum computing, a lot of cool stuff. Please don't be a boring person and talk about some cool stuff. If you talk about cybersecurity and cyber war in AI and healthcare, I guarantee you're getting some nice points on that question. Genomes, personalized medicine, designer babies, curing disease, diagnostics, and reinforcing bias. All right, y'all. Pro tips. Last few slides. Organization. Always organize your answers very, very well, because you can say the best answer in the world. It doesn't matter if it's not organized. This is literally about letting your amazing answers get the recognition they deserve, okay? So I would often start like this. Hello, I'll begin by addressing the pros and cons of implementing such a health policy, a public health policy, before giving my opinion and then relating it to an experience I've had in the area. This is absolutely beautiful because you fully tell them, when most people, you know, they've heard the same answer to the same question 20 times that day. You are organizing your answer so they can follow along much easier. They know what to expect. While other people just start talking and they start rambling, and then halfway through their talking, they come up with an idea, and then they go on a tangent, and then they forgot their main point. It's a mess, okay? This happens to a lot of people. Organize, give an organizing sentence. And then at the end, you say, I'm going to relate it to an experience I've had in the area. So automatically, before you even said your answer, in my opinion, you've started standing out, because they're like, wow, I've heard the same answer to this basic question 20 times today, but this person's going to give me something more. They're going to relate it to a personal experience they've had in the area. I mean, they're going to be on the edge of their seats. It's going to be like a holiday for them. They're going to get something cool from you. And lastly, should you give a summary statement? I usually didn't, but I mean, if I had more time left and it was asynchronous, yeah, you could consider doing that. There's no harm. I know a lot of people that always provide summaries at the end. That's fine. But I always chose to give like another idea instead of a summary. Avoid extreme stances. So a lot of people think they can do this automatically. They think, oh, you don't need to tell me this, Kevin, obviously. But it's much more nuanced than you may think. Like, should pharmaceutical companies be allowed to provide gifts, such as free samples of their latest medicines, to physicians? And most people, I guarantee you, most people will be like, oh, pharmaceutical companies, bad people. Giving gifts to physicians? No, that's a conflict of interest. You can't do that. So, oh, no. The physician's going to be biased. Oh, no. And fair point. I don't think that's wrong. But if you can think of the other side, like what if there was a patient that could have really used that drug, that compound, and they couldn't afford it, right? Because in Ontario, we have Medicare. So our medical care is free at point of service, but we don't have pharmacare. We don't provide free medications and drugs. If you need an antibiotic, I mean, you're paying for that guy yourself, or you're using your parents' insurance or your own insurance that you typically get through work. So think of that. Maybe those free samples can help someone in need. Or what if this helps the physician discover a great new drug that has less side effects and can help treat some patients in a better way? Or the pharmaceutical company, what if it's a local pharma company and they're a big part of the local economy and now they can't advertise, so because of this law, they're going to go bankrupt and all these people are going to get fired, and now they can't make those drugs anymore. Now we have to buy them from the US and they cost 5 times as much. So there's a lot of weird ways where even the evil person has a point of view. If you don't address that, then you're going to have the basic answer that no, it's a conflict of interest. You're going to have that person's answer. You don't want that person's answer. If you want to be, comfortable, you need to give extraordinary answers. So always think about the other perspective, even if they seem evil. Study at night. So this is a huge one for me. Sorry, did I cut off? I think I might have cut off for a second or two.
You're good.
Yeah. So study at night, this is a huge one for me. When I was a teenager, I read this book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. The main point, one of the main points was the stuff you do an hour before you sleep gets replayed in your head up to 6 times more than anything else you did that day. And I don't know how true that number is, but I highly believe it, because if you go on Instagram or you're watching the news before you go to bed, it's like, oh, this person got murdered, there was a carjacking, blah, blah, blah. You're not gonna have good sleep. If you watch a horror movie before you go to bed, you're gonna have nightmares. So what I would always do is, before I went to bed, the period before sleeping would be my interview prep time exclusively. I'd also prep other times of the day, but I would always reserve that. So the perspective taking mindset would become ingrained into my thinking. So it wouldn't be something I'm memorizing for test day. These would become opinions that just became part of how I speak and how I think. And lastly, listen to things beyond what everybody's listening to. I would listen to Nature Biotechnology podcast. I would read the MIT Tech Review. I would read the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal. Go to the gym, listen to podcasts on economics, on finance, on technology. This is how you're going to gain those cool perspectives that other people are simply not providing, okay? Share videos of your answers with colleagues. So this is the last part where I'm going to show you our platform. Let me just X out. How do I X out of this? What's going on? So this is our website. We have question banks on things like the medical school interview, Casper, and so on. So if you go to the medical school interview question bank, it's kind of like the UWorld interface. You can go to test mode. If, say, you're a McMaster, so you're going to do 8 MMI questions, 2 minutes to read, and give yourself 4.5 minutes to answer. Okay, and then you can begin. You're asked the question, right? As a future physician, how do you anticipate you would approach treating patients with different backgrounds than you? What difficulties would you expect to encounter? You have time to think, just like in your interview. You can begin your response, talk to the camera, and I'm just skipping through it, but it'll go the whole thing. And then you can save. I would share videos like this with my colleagues, and then you could study those answers. All right, so that's that. Next, and this is kind of like a hot topic, so I always leave it for the end. Be cautious with consulting. I spent $2,000 on consulting my first year of applying, and I spent it all on interview prep. The second year I interviewed, I spent nothing, and I got into many medical schools. The first year I got into no medical schools. Typically what they do is connect you with a medical student. I worked with 2 of the biggest companies, I'm not going to say their names because this is recorded, but what they do is they connect you with medical students who charge you $200 to $300 an hour just to be like, who's the most important person in the healthcare team? And then I'd say some silly answer, and they'd be like, no, you should have said the patient. The patient's the most important person in the healthcare team. So that was not worth $300 an hour. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. Again, there's so many topics, and this list is going to be sent to you. We have, let me pull this up. We have mini question banks on Ontario health policy, opioid crisis, AI in health, social determinants of health, U.S. health policy, remember, because you do want to understand the health systems of other countries, telehealth, British Columbia, genetic testing, CRISPR, vaccine ethics, and so much more. So definitely understand these topics. And we will be giving a subscription credit right after this webinar, along with the slides. And it's going to be a good one because I went to McMaster BHSC, so I can't let y'all down. Bigger than anything we've ever given before. So, and now is the Q&A if anyone has any questions for me.